Hello everyone and welcome to Advanced Statistics on Meta-Analysis. I am your course instructor, George Banks, of course. Before we proceed, I would like to take a moment to thank several researchers whose slides and software we'll use throughout this course, specifically Michael Bornstein, Mike Brannick, Julian Higgins, Huey Lee, Hannah Rothstein, Frank Schmidt, Pierre Steele, Ann Wade, Dave Wilson, and Mike McDaniel. So a brief introduction into meta-analysis. Meta-analysis is basically quantitatively summarizing information from multiple studies, studies which can include multiple samples, to ultimately produce an estimate of the overall magnitude of a relationship or the impact of an intervention. So basically what we're doing is we're summarizing results across multiple studies. And what we're ultimately trying to obtain is a best estimate of a population effect size. And by effect size, of course, we mean correlation or standardized mean difference. With meta-analyses, you can obtain mean estimates as well as variance of an effect size. And ultimately, one of the things that you can do, in addition to coming up with an overall sort of summary effect, you can begin to investigate different sources of variance. So you have an overall population mean correlation, for example, and you can investigate under different circumstances how that effect size might vary. And variation can be due to true moderating variables, or variation can result from artifactual variance such as measurement error or range restriction, as we'll discuss later on in this course. So studies that provide data for meta-analysis are called primary studies. So as I mentioned previously, a primary study can include multiple samples. So in a meta-analysis, what we're doing is we're summarizing results across samples. Sometimes people use the term studies and samples interchangeably, but ultimately what we're doing with a meta-analysis specifically is summarizing across samples, and the samples, of course, come from studies. So it's important to distinguish it just simply because you can have multiple samples within one study. It is important also to distinguish meta-analysis from a secondary analysis. So sometimes researchers may go and reanalyze a large data set. This is basically what we'd consider a secondary analysis, not a meta-analysis, because you're not summarizing across multiple samples, multiple studies. Okay, so in addition, one of the reasons why we want to do meta-analysis, besides coming up with these summary statistics, are because literature reviews in general have a higher citation count than primary studies. This is because they contain more information. So researchers who are looking to cite evidence in their studies are able to basically draw upon more from your summary. So it's a lot easier to read basically one literature review than it is to read 100 primary studies. So I have a couple of friends who are still getting their PhDs. They're studying for comprehensive exams. They asked me for tips. One of my first suggestions was to look for theoretical reviews as well as quantitative reviews, so basically meta-analyses, because again, this is similar to reading numerous studies as basically instead of having to go out and search for all of these articles, you can just read one. Other reasons for doing a meta-analysis: authors of a literature reviews often achieve a reputation as an expert in this area. Again, so people will look to you as someone that's having read multiple primary studies, theoretical papers, and use that to develop qualitative or quantitative reviews. You're looked upon as someone that is very familiar with the literature. And this, again, is particularly true with meta-analyses. Meta-analyses are very, very highly cited. And then once meta-analysis is done, of course, future primary studies have to be framed consistent with that meta-analysis. So several of the meta-analyses I've published, I've one in evolutionary biology, another in an organizational context that investigates team member exchange and leader member exchange. Two of the primary contribution from both of those meta-analyses, in my opinion, was directing the primary studies how to improve both the theoretical and methodological moderators that they were testing within those studies. So as an example, meta-analyses exist on the validity of employment interviews for predicting job performance. Several of those meta-analyses are much more highly cited because they summarize across multiple primary studies. And future primary studies on the validity of interviews basically have to address gaps that weren't covered by the meta-analysis. and meta-analyses will oftentimes end by saying future research, future primary studies should investigate this so that an updated meta-analysis can be completed. So the objectives for this course include understanding the rationale behind a meta-analysis, understanding the conceptual and statistical background for a meta-analysis, and I'd like all participants to be able to conduct a meta-analysis, interpret the results of a meta-analysis, and to be able to write a review in accordance with current best practices.